Hi guys, welcome everyone. My name is Vera and today I'll show you how to paint our spring cardinal right here. Now before we start, let's go through all our supplies to make sure we have everything that we need for today. And guys, remember this is a video recording, so if you need a bit more time for a certain step, feel free to just pause this video, give yourself enough time, and then whenever you're ready, you can resume it and join me again. So the first thing you're going to need is a canvas. I will be using the 16 by 20 inch canvas. As you can see, it's pretty big. However, if you guys don't want to go as big, that's okay. You don't have to go with such a big canvas. You can definitely go with a smaller canvas, especially if this is your first time in a long time painting. The smaller you go, the easier it's going to be. And the bigger you go, the more challenging and longer it's going to take you as well. All right, next thing we're going to need is a pencil, because we're going to start with a sketch. So if you have a regular pencil and eraser, please grab them. If not, that's okay. You can still do this painting and you can sketch with paint instead of pencil. Now after that, we're going to need some water. So make sure you have some painting water. And we're going to need some paper towel, or if you have a reusable fabric cloth, you can use that as well, no problem. In my case, I'm going to be using a paper towel today. You're going to need a palette or something to mix your paint on, so grab one of those, or maybe a couple. And we're going to need brushes and paint as well. As far as brushes, I'm going to be using 3 different brushes here: large, medium, and small brush. So those are my 3 brushes I'm going to be using today. In my case, as you can see, my large is square and my medium is also square brush. However, if you have only pointy brushes, that's okay. The shape of your brush doesn't affect this painting. You can do this with any shaped brushes, no problem. Just make sure you have a couple different sizes, and very important, you're going to need a good detailed brush because there are quite a few details on this painting, so make sure you have that. And of course, we're going to be using paint. I will be using primary colors only, which is yellow, red, blue, plus black and white. And I'll be mixing them into all shades of this. And for those of you who are wondering what paint I'm using, this is the paint that I'll be using. It's a student grade acrylic paint. This particular is a Start brand. I personally recommend it. And just FYI, we're not being paid for promoting this paint. We just get asked very often what a brand of paint we use when we paint. This is what we use, and it's good for the good value for money, and it's a good quality as well. But you're free to use absolutely any brand of student grade acrylic paint. If you want to attempt it with watercolors, yep, go for it. Oil, I wouldn't probably recommend because we're teaching it with a fast drying paint technique. So any fast drying paint really should work for you for this painting. And if you guys would like to use pre-mixed colors instead, absolutely go for it. In this case, you're going to need 2 different shades of pink, maybe even more if you want to be really fancy. You're going to need this green, so it's like a very cool, something between emerald and teal and mint color. So it's a green on a colder side, something even between blue and green. You're going to need red for your cardinal, you're going to need yellow, and you're going to need some orange. So those are pretty much, oh, of course, some black and white because there are a lot of grays here. So those are pretty much colors you're gonna need here. So you're free to use pre-mixed colors, that's okay too if you prefer that. So what are we gonna do here? Let me explain how this is gonna go now. We're going to start with sketch. We're going to sketch our bird first. Once we have, and the reason why we're gonna start with a sketch actually is because we wanna use pencil. If I did a background first, for us to use pencil, we're gonna need to wait until it dries fully because we can't sketch with a pencil over wet background, and especially if we do, even if we manage to sketch with a pencil over wet background, we would not be able to erase it because that a pencil is gonna be really stuck in that paint. So that's why we're gonna start with a sketch with a pencil with empty background. That way, if we make any extra lines, we can just erase them and redo the whole thing. So it gives us more ability to make mistakes and fix them. Again, if you don't have pencil, you're free to do this with a light gray paint and maybe as the smallest brush that you have. Once we have our sketch, we're gonna move to our background and we're gonna paint our background. As you can see, there are quite a few shades of gray there. So we're gonna wet our background and then we're gonna work from the middle, from the lightest towards the darkness to the sides. And we're going to use very wide brush strokes with a large brush on an angle like that. After we have our gray, we're gonna add a little bit of this green. So this teal kind of green color, so this one. And if you have pre-mixed, you can use it pre-mixed. If not, we'll mix it together, no problem. And we're gonna add a couple of brush strokes of pink as well. Once we have that, we're gonna move to our cardinal and we will add a first layer of red on our cardinal, and we're going to add our branches in black. Once we have that, we're gonna start adding more layers on our cardinal as our branches dry. And once our branches dry up enough, we're gonna add our flowers on them. But first they will have to dry because they're black. And if they don't dry properly and we start adding our pink flowers, it's gonna smudge, it's gonna be muddy color, it's gonna be messy, and we don't want that. We want colors to stay nice and bright and vibrant. And then we're just gonna add more layers. As you can see, there are quite a few shades of pink here. There's some green for some leaves here. And the last thing we're going to do is we're gonna add a couple black outlines. Do you see? So really fine lines to certain areas. And of course, we're gonna add black details to our cardinal as well. We'll add a little white highlights as well. So it's a lot of layering here. But yeah, overall, it's a very fun painting. And if you guys wanna modify it, if let's say you wanna introduce one more color into this painting, absolutely go for it. If you wanna change the shape or the amount or the colors of your flowers, that's a great modification to do as well. You're free to do that, absolutely. And if you wanna have different leaves, maybe you want to do not just one color, maybe you want to introduce second color for the leaves. Again, that's something you can do. Anything you can think of here, you can do. All right, so now let's start. I need you all to grab your pencils. So I have my pencil right here, and I'm going to grab my canvas. And we're going to start with the body of our cardinal. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put something that looks, it's a tricky one, because I'm going to put the belly part first. So I'm going to just put a curved line for the belly. Where I'm going to position, I would say about the middle of the canvas. So let's visually divide this into two halves. And you see the middle would be right here. So technically, all this is around the middle of your canvas. So I would say identify where the middle is first. So for me, the middle is right here. I always find it very helpful to identify the middle of everything first before I move forward. Sorry, guys. Come on, camera. All right. Just making sure my camera is working right so you can see everything here. All right, so I have my dot here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to put line underneath. So on this left side. So then my bird ends up right in the middle. So this is the line I just put on. You can even make it bigger. I'm gonna make it bigger too. You see? All right. Now once we have this, we're gonna add a back. So from here, out, I would say about here. And again, this is pencil, so if something goes wrong, we can always change it. Nothing is set in stone. Now we're gonna add a head. So right here, it's gonna be more like a triangle, and here it's gonna be a round. So from here, it's gonna be rounded, right? And from here, it's gonna be more like a triangle. Something like this. And I'm gonna erase this right away so it doesn't confuse us. All right, now I'm gonna add a beak. Somewhere around here, and I'm gonna bring beak a little bit into this. Now I'm gonna make this a little bit higher. Erase all the extra lines. Okay, now I'm gonna add a wing. Do you see? Here, there is a wing, there's another line. So I'm gonna add that. So I'm gonna add a line here and a line here, just a little bit. And of course I need to add a tail. So tail, I'm gonna put one line in the middle first, just to indicate the direction of my tail and how long it's going to be. After I have that, I'm gonna add more lines. So I'm gonna add a line here. I will add this piece right here, right? So do you see there are almost like a couple chunks here, right? So I'm gonna break it into those chunks. So I added the first chunk, then I'm gonna add a second chunk somewhere here. And then the last chunk. And it's very important that the tail is thinner here and thicker on the end. So this is pretty much a sketch of our cardinal. So now take a good look at it and see if anything needs to be modified. Are you happy with it? Because if you're not, the best time to modify it is right now. Once we move on to the actual coloring in and painting, you're not going to be able to change much in your sketch. So take a good look at it and see if something needs to be changed. And I'm going to erase a couple extra lines here. Alright, I'm quite happy with the sketch. I'm gonna keep it. I don't think I want to modify anything else. So I think I'm gonna stick with that. And hopefully you guys are happy with your sketches. And once you are, then we can move on to our background. So again, erase all the lines that you don't want in the end, or any extra lines that happened in this process, and we're gonna move to painting here. Alright, so we're going to start by putting a couple different colors on our palette. So for me, I'm going to really put all my primaries because I'm going to need all of them to mix all the colors for the background. So I'm going to grab my white, my black, my blue, my yellow, and my red. Alright, so I have all my colors, as you can see, black, white, red, yellow, and blue. So now I'm going to grab my brush, the biggest brush that you have, and dip it in the water and let's wet the whole canvas. And only, guys, do this only if you have a fairly large canvas. If, for example, you're using maybe a paper instead, you don't need to do this. Only if you're using canvas, and only if your canvas is pretty big. If you're using, let's say, 8 by 10, you don't need to do this. And the reason why I'm saying this is because the only reason why we're wetting the canvas is to help us spread the paint. It can be quite difficult to spread paint over large areas such as background on a big canvas. So to help ourselves to spread and mix and have the even coverage of paint on our background, that's why we're wetting it. But if your canvas is already small, you're not going to need it because you're not going to have that problem. You're not going to have the problem of struggling to spread the paint or cover your canvas fully. So therefore, you don't really need to wet your canvas. If you wet it, it's not going to be a mistake at all. It just might not be completely necessary for you. And with paper, we're not doing this because we don't want to warp your paper. It's best if you reserve your paper for your paint. All right, so I have all my canvas nice and wet. Let me show you here on a glare. Do you see it's pretty wet? Now, if you find that it's too wet and it's like there are dripping lines here, what you could do, you can always just grab a paper towel and just wipe it lightly with a paper towel to get rid of all those extra drips. But if not, you don't have to do this. So what I'm gonna do now, I'm gonna wash off my brush. I'm gonna grab some white paint. And with white paint, I'm gonna go in the middle, right around my cardinal. You can go, and do you see I'm adding large brush strokes like this in a very messy way with just white paint on them. This is for blending purposes. This is my blending white. That's why I'm adding it. Once it dries, you're not gonna see it on your background, but because we're gonna be adding gray, this is a good blending backdrop. So anywhere around this midsection, if your pencil lines are as visible as mine are, you can go right over them. You don't even have to avoid your cardinal. You can just paint right over him. As long as you can still see your lines, that's all that matters here. And I'm going to see quite a bit with this white. I'm not just adding a tiny brush stroke around cardinal. I'm covering this whole area with quite a few brush strokes. Once that's done, I'm gonna move to light gray. So I'm gonna scoop some white on the side. And guys, all of this has to be done pretty fast because it's much, much easier to blend paint on wet. Once it dries, it's a bit trickier. So the whole background, you kind of want to do in one shot. After that, you're free to take a break if you need to, but not before that. So I scoop some white on the side. Now I'm going to grab just a tiny dot of black, add it in, very, very, very tiny dot of black, add it in. Okay, let's see how this gray is. Oh, this is perfect. You see, it's fairly light gray. Now closer to the edges of canvas, I'm going to start adding this gray. Maybe even right to the edge. Do you see? And with the same large brush strokes, and then only then I go closer to my white and I somewhat blend it into white. I'm not creating a perfect blending. I just don't want it to be a very solid line, let's say in between my white and gray. So do you see, I would add a couple of brush strokes of gray and then I continue going over into my white without refilling my brush. So what it does, because my brush is already almost empty, it only has a little bit of gray left, it spreads that a little bit of gray onto that white, onto that wet white, but also at the same time, it picks up that wet white on my brush and it creates much lighter grays. So it creates a nice transition. So I ran out of color. I'm gonna make a bit more of that gray. And I'm gonna go on the bottom here. In the same motion, do you see I didn't change the angle of my brush strokes. I'm going with the exact same brush strokes. And if your canvas already dried, use some water. Make sure you dip your brush in the water every now and then because you wanna continue using paint that is wet enough. It's not a dry brushing technique. You need to have quite a bit of water. So I just watered down my paint even a little bit. And I'm gonna continue doing this right here. You see? And then as I get closer to my white, my brush already doesn't have that much paint on it. Plus it starts picking up that still fresh white and I'm creating a nice blending. So it's more of a transition now from dark to light. It doesn't have this harsh line where you can see where one color ends and second color begins. And now the only corner I have to cover is this corner. The rest of them are covered right now. So I'm gonna move on to that corner before it all dries, because again, you have to work fast. So again, I dipped my brush in the water. I'm gonna grab a bit more of that gray and I'm gonna go right here. And again, I start from the very corner, I add some gray there and then I spread it. And if it didn't turn out, which can happen, and that's okay because we're all learning. This is, you know, you don't have to do it perfect from the first try. Perfection is not an expectation we have of you guys. So if it didn't turn out, for example, and what you have now is lots of gray and then white and there is no transition, what you could do, you could do transition the other way around. You can wash off your brush and while your gray is still wet, you can take some white and put it in the middle and then start blending it towards this outside to create the same effect, just from white to gray this time. And if you're gonna do that way, make sure you wash your brush. Whenever it gets too dirty, you have to wash it and refill it with clean white. In my case, I don't need to do it. It turned out exactly how I wanted it, so there's no need. But if your didn't turn out and your gray is too much and it's too harsh, white, take some white and spread it. Add more white in the middle and spread it towards the outsides. And wash your brush whenever necessary. Now for me, I'm gonna move to another shade of gray. As you can see, this one is a very, very light gray. So I need one more shade of gray that's gonna be a little bit darker. So again, I'm gonna dip my brush in the water here, and then I'm gonna scoop a bit more white because I don't have any of this color left. And this time I'm gonna add a little bit more black. Not a lot, you're not making dark gray, but you are making gray that's a little darker. So I made gray, you see it's not really visibly much darker, but let me try it because it always looks different on a palette and on a canvas. Now see, here you can see that it is darker. So from the corners, I'm gonna add a little bit more of this color. And don't use too much paint here. And another thing, guys, you see where I started there, I pushed a little bit harder on my brush. So there's a bit more paint that went on my canvas. But as I went further and I wanted my brush strokes to be lighter, I was lightly scraping the surface of my canvas. So I'm not even pushing on my brush, I'm just literally scraping the surface of my canvas little bit. So here it's more of a dry brushing technique in a way. And so this is perfect. But let's say it turned out like this. You have blobs and you don't know what to do with them. I'm gonna show you how to get rid of that, just so you know. You wash off your brush, you lightly dab it off on your cloth, and then with a clean, slightly wet brush, you go right over that and you blend it before it dries up. This is how you get rid of blobs in case you have a couple blobs and you don't know what to do. And you see? Perfection. It turned out just right. All right, and now I'm gonna go back to that darker gray. I'm gonna grab a little bit more of it, and I'm gonna add this time from this corner. So now I'm just doing it from this side and from that side, not all the way around. So again, I refilled my brush, and I'm gonna start adding from this corner up. So I push a little bit harder where I start, where I want it to be darker right here, right closer to the edge of my canvas. And then as I go towards the middle, I start just applying it much lighter. I'm not pushing my brush as hard. I'm not using as much paint on my brush, just so this is more like a dry brushing. And you see now these two corners look darker, and that's exactly what we wanted here. That was the goal for us. After this, I'm gonna move to my green here. So because I don't have that green color, I'm gonna need to mix it. I need more white actually for this. All right, so I just got a little bit more white here, so I'm gonna scoop some white. Let's put it right here. Now to this white, I'm gonna add blue, and I will make a medium blue, medium to medium light, I would say, first. Now once I have that, I'm gonna start bringing more to a greeny color. Oh, my paint is starting to run away. So I'm gonna start adding yellow little by little. Add a touch, you'll see it will turn into teal, and continue adding. Add a touch, mix it in. Add a touch, mix it in. Now once you brought it to this something between green and blue, maybe a little bit more towards green, that's where you stop. So for me, I think I could add a couple more smidges of yellow before it gets there. No, this is close. It's like a nice teal. Yes, okay, so I'm not gonna be adding anymore. This is a happy color for me. Do you see? It's something between green and blue. So now I'm gonna empty my brush as good as I can. So it only has a little bit of paint on my brush. And with this, with just a little bit of paint, very light touch, dry brush it on top. Don't push on your brush at all. So right here, very, very lightly, just lightly touching the surface of your canvas. Dry brush it on top. And another place where I'm going to do the same thing is going to be on the opposite side. So from here up. So I'm going to put my canvas like this. And from here up, I'm going to do the exact same thing. You see certain areas again closer to the edge. I'm pushing a little bit harder on my brush so they're a little more visible. But overall, I want it super, super lightly. And again, let me show you how to fix if something went wrong and you have way too much paint in certain spots. I'm going to show you how to fix that. So do you see? A bit here and a bit here, corner and corner. So if you need to fix anything, you're going to wash off your brush right away. Lightly dab it off on a paper towel or a cloth. And wherever you have areas that are a little bit too harsh, so for example this one or that one, with a clean wet brush you're going to go over that right away. And if your paint is still wet, you will see that it will start blending, and that's a good way to fix it. You don't need to do that everywhere. It's completely unnecessary. You don't need to do that at all. This is just me showing you how, if anything goes wrong, you can fix that. Alright, so we have that color, and hopefully you have a little bit more left for later, but if not, that's okay. We can always mix it again once we get there. We're not there yet. And next color that I want to add in the same manner is going to be pink. So again, I'm going to wash off my brush, then I'm going to scoop some white. I'll put it on the side, maybe right here. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of red, make pink. Any shade of pink will do. I would say aim for about medium light pink. That's always a good place to aim for. And with this medium light pink, I'm going to brush in some right here. In the exact same manner that we did with the green one. Very lightly, you almost dry brushing the color on your canvas. And if you find that, for example, maybe your gray is still a little bit too wet, or even your green is a little too wet, and it starts blending and giving you the colors that you don't want to have, and the muddy colors, then you don't have to do it right away. You can wait until all of this dries fully and then go ahead and do that. It's completely up to you guys. So I added some on top, and now I'm going to add a little bit of the same color on the bottom right here. Now again guys, if you need to go back and fix certain areas, if they turned out a bit too blobby for your liking, go for it. And now I actually want to add one more shade of pink before we finish up our background. So I just want to make slightly darker pink. Just going to grab a little bit more red, add it into the same pink. Do you see it gets darker? It's still not dark, but it's darker. It's more like a medium, true medium. And I'll just add just a couple brush strokes. I'm not going to add as much of it. I'll add just a couple brush strokes on top and just a couple brush strokes on the bottom here. And that's pretty much it. Our background is done. I'm not going to be adding anything else here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wash off my large brush and I'll put it aside. And I'm going to grab my medium brush. And with my medium brush, I'm going to add a first layer on our Cardinal. So I'm going to make red. My red is more like pink. It's not really, it's more like a dark magenta. So for me to make it more like a fire truck red, I'm going to need to add just a tiny dot of yellow to it. So I'm going to scoop some of my red to the side. If your red is the exact shade that you love, you can use it straight from the tube. You absolutely don't need to mix it. I'm only mixing because I know my red and it's not the red that I would prefer to use right now. So I scooped some of it on the side. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow. Doesn't have to be much. I just want to give it a little hint of orange. So it's not as pinky. So it's more like red versus pinky red. And with this color, I'm going to color the whole thing. And it's going to take more than one layer of red for us to make a nice solid colored Cardinal. Do you see now it lays on very streaky? You see this? That's why we're going to add more than one layer. But we're going to start with one layer. One layer is always a good start. So just color the whole thing. Don't color the beak, of course, because the beak is going to be orange. But everything else, go for it. And don't worry about streakiness. That's why we're doing 2 layers here, to get rid of all the streakiness. Also, let me show you another element. So as we get closer here you're gonna use either small brush or the top edge of your medium flat brush, or just the tip of your medium rounded brush, and you're gonna flick from here up like this. And of course, don't do this part if your background white is still wet. You need to have your background white dry. Okay, that's perfect. We have our first layer on our cardinal, and now I'm going to add a first layer of branches. So we're gonna do our branches in a couple different steps. We're gonna start with the bigger branches. So as you can see here, there's some branches that are bigger, like this one is a big branch and this one is a big branch. So we have 2 big branches. After that, we have bigger branches coming out from those branches. So we have a thicker branches that are sticking out from our main branches, and then we have a small branches, the really tiny ones that come out from those. So we're gonna start with the thicker ones, then the ones that are coming out from them, and only then we're gonna do the small ones. Now I'm gonna be using medium brush for majority of it, and then when I can't use my medium brush anymore, I'm gonna switch to my small brush. I would recommend you do the same. Definitely start with the medium brush for your main branches. For the second size branches, for this ones, the bigger sticking out branches, either if you're comfortable using your medium brush and your medium brush gives you ability to get the right width of a brush stroke, and if your canvas is big enough, then you can go with a medium brush. If your canvas is smaller than mine, or your medium brush is not that good, you're just not comfortable using it, go with small brush. Small brush is always a safer choice. And for the very small branches, definitely a small brush, the smallest that you have. Now what's important about branches, what you need to know about them is all branches, you're gonna start from where they grow from. So for example, for this big branches, I'm not gonna start at the end, I'm gonna start where they grow from and bring it to the end. And the same for every single branch. All of them are gonna be starting, you're gonna start painting them from where they grow from. And they're gonna be slightly thicker where they grow from. So you can push a little bit harder on your brush when you start, and then as you go further, you slowly let go to create that difference between thicker brushstroke and thinner brushstroke. If it doesn't work out for you, you can always start by putting thin line first and then go back and thickening it up at the beginning. So in the end, you have a gradual decrease in the width of your brushstroke and the width of your branch starting from where it grows from to the end. All right, so I'm gonna grab my medium brush again. I'll dip it in the water, and I'll use the top edge of my medium brush because it gives me ability to make finer lines. And I'm gonna start with my first branch. I'm gonna start from somewhere around here, so a little bit above the midpoint, and I'll bring it right here. You can make it any shape that you want. There's no particular shape that it has to be. And you want to get as fine of an end to it as you can. If you can't, that's okay. You can always switch to small brush and finish up the end with a smaller brush. And now I'm going to go back and I'm going to thicken it up a little bit in certain areas. So do you remember how I told you they need to be thicker where they grow from? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to thicken it up so it looks like it's thicker where it grows from. And then I'm going to position my second main branch. Second main branch is going to go from here down, and it's going to go right under the cardinal. So I'm going to break for the tail and then I'm going to continue. So somewhere right here. And again, try to make a really fine tip if you can. If not, you can always do that later with a small brush. All right, and there's one more branch that I want to add. It's a very small one, so I can't really call it a main branch, but it is a separate branch. It's right here. So it's a separate branch that's not too thick. And you see I was able to get really fine end, but if not, what you could do, again, you can just grab your small brush, some black, and wherever you can't get fine end with a medium brush, you can always finish up with a small brush, and then that really fine tip with a small brush. It's totally fine. Now I'm gonna add those second size branches. They're a little bit smaller, but still not the smallest ones. Technically, you can add them anywhere, or you can repeat after me and add them in exactly where I'm adding them. And again, notice how they all come from existing branches, and not from the outside, and always from the branch out. Now I'll add a couple here as well. All right, so let's add one right here. And now I can start adding really small branches. So I'm gonna wash off this brush. And I will take a really small brush and I will add a couple of tiny branches. Again, always from existing branches out. All right, so I think this is enough, but if you want to have more branches, you can add more. It's as many as you want to have on your tree. Another thing you could do right away is you could just take a little bit of white paint on your small brush. Wash off your brush first though. Then take just a little bit of white paint on your small brush. You can do this while your paint is still wet. You don't have to wait for your branches to dry for this. And we're gonna highlight them a little bit. So I'm gonna add a little highlight with a small brush with small brush strokes on the top of every branch. So you see just a couple brush strokes there. I'm gonna show you guys closer too. And if you see that it starts blending into grays because your paint is still wet, that's actually even better. That's the most ideal scenario here. If it doesn't blend, it will still look really good. But if it does blend to create different shades there, that's even better. And you see, I'm not really gonna go on all the branches. I'm not gonna worry about small branches. Only a fairly big ones. All right, so this is good. And now, because my cardinal is already dry, I'm gonna go ahead and I'll add a second layer of red. So I'll wash off my medium brush. I'll take some red again, and I'll just add a second layer, and you will see it will increase the brightness. It's gonna get rid of all those streaks and brush strokes there. It's gonna make it a more solid color. Do you see? It's a better coverage now. This is the one layer, this is two layers. Much better. Now be careful with black though. Don't accidentally smudge a branch into this because it's gonna make it muddy and dark. So wherever it touches branches, be very careful. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna wash up my brush. I'll dry it, I'll put it aside, and I'll give all of this a break time so it can dry. So guys, just put it aside for a little bit, wash off your brushes, let it dry up fully, and when your branches and your cardinal are dry, come back and join me again and I'll do the same thing. All right, I'll see you guys soon.